National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown.
Well, coming up today marks 3 years since President Cyril Ramaphosa put the country on a hard lockdown. Cabinet expected to discuss legal advice compiled by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation on the warrant of arrest issued by the International Criminal Court for Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin. Well, very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we are live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at what we can expect for the days to come. All right, so we start things off by taking a look at what transpired 3 years ago. Today, in fact, marks 3 years since President Cyril Ramaphosa put the country on a hard lockdown. This was to curb the spread of the coronavirus, which was a global pandemic that shook economies and shut down borders whilst claiming millions of lives. 3 years later, the country is still reeling in the aftermath caused by this life-changing virus. SABC journalist Nomvuyo Ntanjana and video journalist Sipho Mguni compiled this report. Take a look.
The National Institute for Communicable Diseases confirmed that a suspected case of COVID-19 has tested positive.
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown.
The objective of why they're saying they're banning alcohol is because of the coronavirus. And I'm saying that that's not a scientific, it's not based on science.
There is not even anyone who's coming to control the situation or anything that's going on in here.
We're not even united, my friend.
Others, they are sick, others, they have a low stroke.
A new viral outbreak from China is spreading around the world. Countries like the US, Japan and Thailand have confirmed cases.
Today, the CDC and the Illinois Department of Public Health announced a second case of novel coronavirus in the United States.
A Chinese health official has said the virus is adapting and mutating. So far, hundreds of cases have been confirmed and several people have died.
The president has issued the instruction for the evacuation of South Africans from Wuhan in Hebei province in China.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
When the World Health Organization made that declaration, South Africa had just confirmed its first case.
The National Institute for Communicable Diseases confirmed that a suspected case of COVID-19 has tested positive. The patient is a 38-year-old male who traveled to Italy.
A wave of apprehension for South Africans. It would not be long before the country would see a great snowballing of infections.
Another 4 members of a tour group that visited Italy test positive for the coronavirus in South Africa.
A Limpopo doctor tests positive for the coronavirus.
The number of confirmed coronavirus cases in South Africa has now risen to 274.
By the 23rd of March that year, the cases recorded were over 400, a 128 increase compared to the previous day. This forced the government to impose a nationwide hard lockdown.
As a consequence, The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March.
Even though other governments around the world had taken the same measures to curb the spread of the virus, in South Africa, panic and anxiety heightened.
If you for 21 days labor ikhuluma yena then ngizoba ngaspan for 21 days angazi ukuthi kuzoyenzakalani.
There's no correlation between COVID-19 and alcohol. There isn't. There are social ills, that's true, to do with alcohol. But the objective of why they're saying they're banning alcohol is because of the coronavirus. And I'm saying that that's not a scientific, it's not based on science. And I'm saying, where have the police been all along? Where have the traffic police been to curb drunk driving?
However, a few days into the lockdown, the country would soon be quiet as some citizens were forced to comply. And wildlife finally reclaimed the streets. However, both beautiful and unusual, this was the quiet before the storm.
They keep on bringing a group of more people each and every day. Yeah. So we cannot be having a social distancing here.
Others, they are sick, others, they have a low stroke.
Ngilambe ngoku mina ndingumuntu akwazi mhlawumbe ndiqhubele itroli ndihamba ndosikana kubhalwa kwazikrep kubhalwa kwantoni yonke ngoku ananemali ngoku ndiyabhuye 20 rand khola ngoku nganika usemsebenzini baba usemsebenzini uqashiwe shem wena mna mntu kaqashwa ndithini.
As lockdowns became stricter, some tried to smuggle their loved ones from province to province, even with the interprovincial travel bans being placed.
When for sure human trafficking, must arrest you.
And some restrictions proved harder to bear.
Baba Nkosi, sikhulukelela amanzi Jesu. Asazi wena wathini uza amanzi ashintshe beyiwayi. My
fellow South Africans,
some wounds remained deeper as the virus continued to wreak havoc. Finally, 2 years later, after different levels of lockdowns, the president declared the end of the national state of disaster.
While the pandemic is not over, and while the virus remains amongst us, these conditions no longer require that we remain in a national state of disaster.
But while many may want to forget the horrors brought by the pandemic, others continue to suffer its physical, emotional, and financial consequences.
I think the government handled this whole thing very wrong. That's my own view.
Sbusiso, a father of 3, narrates the emotional turmoil he goes through on a daily basis since losing his employment.
everything just changed when time goes on. Now, you have to get another job. You can't provide for bona. It's gonna be tough. So they decided, we're gonna move out. I do blame the government. I think they should have tried ukwenza sure ukuthi wonke umuntu oluze umsebenzi if kunamanye ama-company afuna abantu baqale ngabo at those times.
Blaming anyone wouldn't actually bring me any peace.
23-year-old Katlego lost his grandmother to COVID. She was a sole breadwinner at home. Now left to fend for himself, he lives off handouts.
I get very emotional. I actually don't know. It's like I could actually burst, you know, because she was there. She was actually, I could say she was my rock, my father, my mother. She was everything. Abantu besonto bangisize kakhulu. Namanje basangisiza. I understand. Kunomunye ubaba bathi strike netonje. After God was passing, actually took me in as his son. That's where I eat. That's where I bath. Other than that, ekhaya nje ngihlala kwenye room encane. Leyo room leyo, there's no stove, there's nothing. You understand?
Some entrepreneurs are still reeling in the aftermath of hard lockdowns.
Lento lesiphila ngayo. Esilobhalisela imithetho ukuthi no kwenze kanje kuhlalwe distance eso. Ningakwenza lokho mara ibusiness iqhubeka. Bona manje mabavala bathi ukuthi subulawa indlala.
Now that things seem to be getting back to normal, do South Africans have nothing to worry about anymore?
The WHO keeps a view of the global patterns and many other countries as well. So that will also give us an idea if there's any change in the pathology of this particular virus or the effect of this virus. Is it mainly in older adults that it's more severe, or has it changed to children? So those are the pieces of information that still keep us informed about this particular virus, yes. But the key part is preventing severe infections resulting in you all being hospitalized and dying from your disease. So there's still people that are having severe disease and are still dying. So my view, and I'm sure many experts would agree with us, is that we need to encourage people to vaccinate. In South Africa, we've only vaccinated about just maybe 50% of our population that need to be vaccinated.
Since on that COVID, in a situation sokuhlaba namanje isandla sami asisipani grain since ngithabile ngeCovid, so I don't know ukuthi is affect me or what. I don't understand.
Ngahamba ngayo hlaba yona le vaccine yakhona ukubuya kwami la ngafika ngahlala until 9 o'clock la ngaphakathi. Then the following day I couldn't wake up.
The side effects are minimal. They're about, and they apply to many vaccines, not just this particular vaccine. When we look at the general side effects that we do see when you are injected in the arm, for example, it can be sore, painful. You may have some nausea and vomiting, but these resolve, and you can treat them. You can use Panado, for example, and you can have bed rest, and it will resolve. And there are severe side effects, but these are rare, really rare vaccines. In fact, when I look at recent data from SAPRA, I can't really see that it's a major problem in South Africa.
Just hopefully, they'd find us jobs. That's one thing, we need jobs, please, because now we're sitting, just hoping for a call from someone to call you, can you come do this for me, then pay you. So at least if you get a job, maintain your kids, I'd be happy.
All right, so other news set to make headlines this coming week. The DA will hold its Federal Congress on the 1st and the 2nd of April 2023 in Johannesburg. This is to elect a new leadership and make resolutions to, as part of the country, of course, gears up for the 2024 elections. The Congress will be hosted under the theme, a strong DA to build a better future. So the party's newly elected leadership will be announced on Sunday, the 2nd of April. But perhaps for this and more, we're joined by Professor Kyaleboga Mapunye. He's a professor of African politics at UNISA. Prof, very good afternoon. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
We are anticipating the Federal Congress of the DA that's set to take place this coming week, and obviously the implications that this will hold, perhaps as we head into 2024 and beyond. DA leader John Steenhuisen going head-to-head with former Johannesburg Mayor Mpho Phalatse, as well as Lungile Penyani, who's also challenging Helen Zille. This is for the position of chairperson of the Federal Council. I wonder how you'd weigh in on, what is the likelihood of the DA really electing a new leader?
It's a tough call because when I look at the 2018 DA Congress, I wonder whether much has changed since then to date, because previously there were issues that almost derailed that leadership contest. This time around, we've got a John Steenhuisen, who is the sitting leader of the party, and who has been holding the fort ever since the departure of Mmusi Maimane, a strong leader before a black leader before him. So I'm just wondering, when I look at, pound for pound, Steenhuisen against Mpho Phalatse, what the odds could be. Some could argue that on the one hand, Steenhuisen has got much political clout and has got 1 foot, maybe 2 feet ahead of the two contenders that you have just mentioned, because he is the sitting leader of the party and known to many South Africans, because we have to look at this DA, by the way, because it is the party, the second largest party in the country, even in the National Assembly, as a contender for the first place. In other words, this could be a party that if South Africans chose to vote differently in 2024, it will be governing the country. In other words, with a Steenhuisen as a president. So we have to look at it that way. Now, I ask myself, could the DA do things differently such that instead of Steenhuisen winning next weekend at the Congress, we have Mpho Phalatse, and by so saying, eventually having a black female president in the form of Mpho Phalatse? Those are the questions that we ask ourselves as we look at this contest.
And Prof, you mentioned how, those positions and those dynamics are crucial as we head into 2024. But we have to look at the current dynamics of the party and what is influencing it within. We saw that another high-profile DA leader had exited the party policy head Gwen Ngwenya. We have obviously seen an exodus of Phumzile Van Dam, Herman Mashaba, Mmusi Maimane, just to name a few. We've even got Bongani Baloyi. What are your thoughts on this mass exodus? Can the party perhaps still reach diversity, influence, dynamics on the ground, given this exodus of a number of high black leaders that were part of the party in the past?
That exodus, as you call it, of black leaders, which the DA has been experiencing recently, in my view, is like hemorrhaging, the effectiveness and influence of the DA in South Africa's political landscape. Because in my view, once you have such a large number of prominent black public representatives, politicians, black activists within the DA who, for one reason or the other, jump ship, that is very worrisome in political terms and should also be worrisome to the DA as it leads to next week's Congress. So this, in a nutshell, does not augur well for the party for its next Congress, as well as for the 2024 elections, because it's like a wounded animal that is going to contest in a very, very fierce contest, as we know that the 2024 elections is quite likely to be very, very emotive, very highly contested. And to that extent, you would not want yourselves as a party to go into that kind of arena, political arena, in that space where you are limping. But this appears to be the case. So the loss of many of these black political leaders and politicians within the DA, on the one hand, it reduces or is quite likely to undermine the effectiveness, the campaign strength of the party as it prepares for those elections. But on the other hand, it might also affect its voter turnout. We know that in 2014, the DA had 22% national vote, but by 2019, it had lost, 1% of that, and which fell to 2019. Now, I keep asking myself, will the DA be able to increase, that national vote, count from the loss that it suffered in 2019? Or what are we quite likely to experience?
Which is actually begs my next question. What does the conference ultimately mean for the biggest opposition party in the country as we near 2024? Are we expecting any snubs and surprises? What do they need to also do differently, perhaps to also increase their voter base?
They need to be honest about the political dynamics of South Africa. And one of those is to acknowledge quite sincerely the racial issue in politics in South Africa does not go away. Whether we like it or not, race becomes a very, very important part of South African political landscape and dynamics. And once they acknowledge that, then they will know that they have to do things differently. They have to go into the townships or into the hinterland, into those marginalized shanty towns, one might call them, or informal settlements, where they will be able to speak the language that the people there understand. In other words, understanding the bread and butter issues, but also the historical disadvantages that those communities have suffered. Apart from that, they also need to look at the diversity of South Africa in a broad terms, not just looking at it from a liberal point of view, but to understand that the reason why they have not been able to win elections and maybe to upstage the ANC, which is what I know they want to do, so that they can be party number one and govern the country, might be because they are missing the tune somewhere in terms of appealing to the diversity of South Africa's constituencies. And therein lies the issue, not just about upstaging the ANC, but also increasing their vote turnout and voter appeal.
Prof, we also have to look at some of the clouds that pervade and hang over the party. Reading about, how the former mayoral committee member Malusi Boy's offices raided on the 15th of March. This was in relation to a multi-million rand housing tender in Cape Town. The party, at this point, considering suspending him. I wonder how you'd weigh in on the impact of that. Also, looking at the Cape Coloured voter base, that is, Cape Coloured Congress rather, that's come out to accuse the DA of using Boy as a scapegoat to cover up its corruption. I mean, stories like this coming out ahead of 2024, ahead of their Congress that's set to take place in just a few days. What span on the works does it throw for the party?
As we look at the potential of the DA in terms of the 2024 elections, we realize that like any other party, whether it is the ANC, whether it is the EFF, whether it is the ATM, or any other party for that matter, it has to make sure that it goes into the contest having rather a clean slate. But in politics, it's never easy. There will always be these skeletons, some call them small skeletons in the closet, which will affect a party. And the DA is not immune from that. Occasionally, from time to time, you have stories such as this one coming up, whereby people are resigning, or people are being suspended, or people are, saying this or that about the party. Obviously, what is important here is how the DA will deal with this in terms of its branding and marketing strategies to deal with matters that undermine or could undermine its political campaign in the run-up to those elections. You talked about the colored vote. Of course, in the Western Cape in particular, it's not only that party that you talked about, but there are other smaller parties that obviously do not agree with the DA, or which would like to upstate the DA in the Western Cape, which also feel that it is not talking the same language of the greater, colored, population voters or voter supporters. And therefore, they feel that it has to be removed because they need another party that can appeal to that sector or that segment, racial segment, one could say, of the Western Cape. So to that extent, the gloves are off, because as we enter the campaign phase of the 2024 elections, we are already in the pre-election period as we speak. It looks like the situation is going to get very, very, very nasty, with parties throwing mud left, right, and center. So we can be prepared for this. And the DA, like any other party, like I've said, has got to undertake measures to deal with such things.
Prof, we'll have to leave the conversation there, but I want to thank you for your time. Perhaps this can serve as a conversation starter for the days to come as we edge closer to the 1st of April, where the DA's Federal Congress kicks off. Again, Professor Kialeboga Mapunye is a professor of African politics at UNISA, weighing in ahead of the 1st and 2nd is when the DA's Federal Congress is set to take place. So again, thank you to him for his time. So we'll leave it there and take a quick ad break. There is more upon our return. We'll be right back. Right, welcome back. The week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson, continues. So the Nelson Mandela Foundation will on Tuesday, the 28th of March, host a dialogue entitled, "What Does This Moment Call For?" Former President Kgalema Motlanthe expected to deliver opening remarks. Perhaps for this and more, we're joined by Sumaya Hendricks, Head of Advocacy and Dialogue at the Foundation. Sumaya, good afternoon. Thank you for your time here on the week ahead.
Thanks so much for having me to talk about this.
Obviously, we are looking at, South Africa in the context of 29 years into democracy, the strides that have been taken, but also the concerns and challenges that have arisen over the past few years. I wonder, in line with other liberation movements on the continent and their ability to govern, we need to analyze South Africa, the state of South Africa, and where we're at. What does South Africa look like for you as we speak?
No, thank you so much for that question. I think an interesting way to look at it is, so if you look at the 1994 moment, and you say that was an important moment for emancipation, for the granting of legal rights to individuals. Often when we think about the word emancipation, we think about in the context of slavery, but it's very much applicable as well to that 1994 moment. And I think what's very much needed now is a wave of liberation. I think and that's important in the context of the discussion that we're having on Tuesday around what is the role of civil society in bringing about that wave of liberation. Because what that analysis does is it's saying that it's not enough for us to have these individual freedoms, but we actually need, as a society, to be able to be liberated. And it helps to change the agenda somewhat for civil society organizations in particular, but for all sectors, to say that, it's not enough that we say that you have a right to walk on the street if you can't actually, owing to levels of crime. Or you have the right to study wherever you want to, but you can't because of financial barriers. So I think it's an important analysis to say, yes, it was all good and well that we've had that first wave of emancipation, but what we actually need now is a wave of liberation.
Yeah, and so into the Foundation's role to date, because we know united we stand, divided we fall. So with South Africa today, looking at Madiba's vision, how has it been upheld? What has his legacy 10 years meant since his passing?
No, thanks so much for raising that. So 2023 is, as you mentioned, the 10th year commemoration of Madiba's passing, and the foundation has a series of activations in line with that. But I think on reflection, if you see Madiba as being a runner in a race, in a relay, undoubtedly an important runner, a very significant runner, but nonetheless a person who can merely play a very limited role and is unable to run the full race for us as society. And when you see it in that context, you realize that, yes, he was able to, really play an important role, lots of individual sacrifices that he made for the greater good of the collective. But he's very much handed that baton over to us, not only as the foundation, but also society. So when the foundation has said in this 10th year commemoration, Madiba is very much around asking ourselves, and saying the legacy lives on through us. But if it means that it lives on through us, how do we go about using the resources, the individual freedoms, and so on, to be able to orchestrate the kind of change that we need and that we want to see in South Africa, and that Madiba also wanted to see for himself.
Absolutely, which speaks to accountability and personal responsibility, given the juncture of where we find South Africa and ourselves in. And I just wonder, as we look at the panel that has been, picked or handpicked rather on this dialogue, what really can we expect to emerge from there? I know that there are some, pertinent questions ultimately dealing with what does this moment call for? We're heading into 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, no, so I just want to maybe just take us back just about the genesis of this dialogue. So at a board retreat last year of the foundation, we were asking ourselves that, what does this moment call for as an organization? And as we applied ourselves to this question, we realized that many other people and organizations and formations are also asking themselves this question. And so we thought, what would really be valuable is creating a collective space for us to be applying our minds together to this question, so that we can develop ideas to be able to inspire and the kind of action that we want to see. So at the panel, as you've said, they come from different sectors of society. We're very humbled that they accepted our invitation. And I think what we're really hoping to do is, how do we, through the form of dialogue, use it as a means of, as I said, ideation to spur people to action, because even with the upcoming elections, yes, it's important that people are galvanized around the elections, but it cannot be that we have merely a one-year strategy where we all focused on the elections and we want to make sure that people are voting. It must be that the elections fit into a broader strategy, and for us to ask ourselves, what is that broader strategy that we want the elections to fit into? So in that way, we're not directing all our efforts towards the upcoming elections, and then once the election pass, that we don't necessarily have a longer term agenda for change.
Yeah, absolutely. You speak about engaging with civil society at large. And so if people want to, be part of this, connect, have their voices heard, how do they go about doing that? What is the process upon, the dialogue taking place this week?
So we've now closed, we have reached capacity for the in-person attendees, but people are welcome to join wherever they are in the country. There is a online platform that they can join, so they can go to the www.events.nelsonmandela.org to be able to join the conversation.
Right.
And it'll also be live streamed on our YouTube channel, so they can interact there. I'll be facilitating that discussion, so people can also pose questions. We can then also pose to the panelists. And I think importantly, what we want is, there's 4 panelists, but we very much see the audience as being the 5th panelist. So we've created quite a lot of space for engagement with the audience, because we want to create that space where we're really applying our minds together.
So Mayor, thank you for your time. I know that there's so much to discuss, but as you streamline these conversations, it's going to create awareness, empower people with information, and really perhaps ask pertinent questions that will lead to action that's for the benefit of us all. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your time here in the SABC. Sumaya Hendricks is the Head of Advocacy and Dialogue at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, just chatting about Tuesday, the 28th of March, where the foundation will be hosting a dialogue. It's called What Does This Moment Call For? There will be panelists. Sumaya will be hosting that, and we're really just going to look at how far South Africa's come in terms of our democracy 29 years later, perhaps where to from here as we tackle some of the socio-economic challenges from here to and beyond. So we'll leave that conversation there. There is more upon our return. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. So the week ahead continues. In other news, Cabinet expected to discuss legal advice compiled by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. This is on the warrant of arrest issued by the International Criminal Court for Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin over alleged war crimes in the Ukraine, as it will affect the possible visit of President Putin to South Africa later this year. Pretoria, as the chair of BRICS, has invited President Putin to attend the summit in August. But this is not the first time South Africa finds itself in this situation.
It was in 2015, during the African Union Summit, when South Africa had to deal with the challenge of the International Criminal Court warrant of arrest that was issued against a sitting head of state. In 2009, then Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir was indicted by the court for atrocities committed in Darfur. Bashir denied the charges. As a state party to the Rome Statute, which established the ICC, South Africa was under a duty to arrest al-Bashir. Ahead of the AU summit, a human rights organization had threatened to go to court if Bashir was allowed to attend the AU summit. However, Pretoria had argued that Bashir was attending the AU summit and South Africa cannot dictate who should attend. The human rights body brought an application to the North Gauteng High Court to compel government to arrest Bashir. Before the court could rule, Bashir left the country.
There is the view now that we should distance ourselves from the ICC. But unfortunately, the treaty that set it up was signed not by the AU, but by individual countries.
The court later ruled that South Africa has a responsibility to cooperate with the ICC. The government later challenged that court ruling, but lost.
It is necessary in the interest of justice and the rule of law to say the following. The respondents are quite aware of the provisions of sections 1 and 2 of the Constitution, which declare that the state is founded on the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. They are also aware of the constitutional enjoinder that international agreements bind the Republic, especially those that have been ratified. They are obviously bound to comply with domestic legislation and obviously the Implementation Act. They must also be aware of Section 165 of the Constitution, which reads as follows. Section 65(1). The judicial authority of the Republic is vested in the courts. 2. The courts are independent and subject only to the Constitution and the law, which they must apply impartially and without fear, favor, or prejudice. 3. No person or organ of state may interfere with the functioning of the courts. 4. Organs of state, through legislative and other measures, must assist and protect the courts to ensure the independence, impartiality, dignity, accessibility, and effectiveness of the courts. 5. An order or decision issued by a court binds all persons to whom and organs of state to which it applies. I close quote. At this stage, on a common sense approach, there are clear indications that the order of Sunday, 14 June 2015 was not complied with. It is for this reason that we are moved to state that a democratic state based on the rule of law cannot exist or function if the government ignores its constitutional obligations and fails to abide by court orders. A court is the guardian of justice, the cornerstone of a democratic system based on the rule of law. If the state, an organ of state or state official, does not abide by court orders, the democratic edifice will crumble stone by stone until it collapses and chaos ensures. In the context of Section 165 of the Constitution of South Africa, the Constitutional Court has also confirmed that principles of the rule of law are indispensable cornerstones of our constitutional democracy. See in this regard the case of Justice Alliance of South Africa versus the President of the Republic of South Africa 2011. The emphasis must be on indispensable. Where the rule of law is undermined by government, it is often done gradually and surreptitiously. Where this occurs in court proceedings, the court must fearlessly address this through its judgments and not hesitate to keep the executive within the law, failing which it would not have complied with its constitutional obligations to administer justice to all persons alike without fear, favor, or prejudice.
The ANC National Conference in 2017 instructed its deployees to withdraw from the ICC.
The UN Security Council can refer the situation to the ICC because they are not state parties. And this has already happened, we see, in Sudan. Therefore, there was a referral from the UN Security Council. Sudan is not a state party to the Rome Statute. Also in Libya, there was a referral by the UN Security Council to the ICC because Libya also is not a state party. So this is what really was the thinking behind, because what the international community was completely resolute about is that we can no longer have impunity for crimes that shock the conscience of humanity. This was the thinking. It was not a political decision for them to do that. It was to ensure that there is justice whenever these serious crimes, these serious atrocities are committed. And this mandate or this power that is given to the UN Security Council should not be used as a political tool. It is just to ensure that we have accountability, we have justice in those situations. And even though there are parties that are not part of the UN Security Council, that are not part in the UN Security Council, that are not part of the ICC, the driving force behind referring should not be a political reason. It should be to ensure that there is justice in these situations.
The former Liberian president, Charles Taylor, was handed over to the ICC in 2006.
But I think the mistake that many African countries made was not to read the fine print, not to look at, for example, the anomalous position of the most powerful countries on the Security Council, the United States, Russia, and China, who, although they can ask for a Gaddafi to be indicted or an al-Bashir, they're above the law. What kind of justice is that? And why did African countries sign up to that when they knew they didn't have a permanent member on the Security Council? They didn't have a right of veto. So why did they sign up to it?
Answer that question for me if you can.
Well,
why?
I think
Why do you think
because,
they did that?
as I say, I don't think they read the small print. I don't think also that they looked at the global power forces which would impact upon the workings of the ICC. I don't think they took that into account.
The ANC conference last year took a decision not to withdraw from the ICC. There has been criticism that the court has failed to act in an independent manner.
The questions that are being raised in respect of unevenness and double standards pointed at ICC are old questions, and are questions the ICC has never been able to respond to. That the ICC is not helping its cause, it's not building its credibility and its integrity by not being seen to be even-handed in the manner in which it deals with the issues. Now, if you look at it, President G.W. Bush of the United States and to some extent President Barack Obama all face potential cases of crimes against humanity and other violations of international law, but none of them have been investigated, none of them will be investigated, none of them will ever be hauled before this court, even though they have a case to answer in relation to international law. And they do not think they need to be tried because they say they are not signatories of the ICC. And here we are now with regards to President Putin of Russia, who has a case to answer. Russia is not a member of ICC, but the ICC has rushed to make sure that it acts on this, almost as if it's seeking approval from certain quarters of the world, almost as if it's trying to show a certain quarter of the world, showing some loyalty to one of the two sides that are now divided in this new Cold War.
Moscow has warned that arresting President Putin will be a declaration of war. Russia is not a member of the International Criminal Court. Sophie Mkwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, welcome back. Let's continue now. The Competition Commission has announced an inquiry into the fresh produce market from the 31st of March. It will focus on a number of fruit and vegetable groups, including apples, bananas, table grapes, potatoes, onions, carrots, and even spinach. Now, the Commission says that the inquiry will examine whether any features in the fresh produce value chain impede, as well as restrict or distort competition within the market. It's calling on all stakeholders across the food value chain, including farmers, to participate in its fact-finding mission.
The Fresh Produce Market Inquiry will look at each layer of the food value chain, including the sale of fresh produce by the farmer to the customer, whether that be a retailer, processor, or an export market. The Competition Commission has been eyeing the food and agro-processing sector since 2008, and now it's biting the bullet with this inquiry.
In November, I think 2021, the Commission published a concentration study. And some of the key findings of that study are that the agricultural sector in South Africa is characterized by high levels of concentration at different levels of the value chain. And as you may be aware, concentration in the market provides a base for a wide range of anti-competitive conduct.
One of the critical areas the Fresh Produce Market Inquiry will look at is the cost of inputs like fertilizers, among other issues.
The inquiry will look at the national fresh produce markets as a route to market for farmers and asks fundamental questions about access, role of market agents, costs associated with selling through these platforms, price discovery process, and barriers to entry. Secondly, the inquiry will look at direct contracting between farmers and retailers, wholesalers, and processors as a route to market. The inquiry intends to understand the basic conditions of entry into various contracting arrangements, price determination, and costs associated with contractual arrangements, including associated terms and conditions.
Ultimately, the inquiry hopes that its work will result in a more competitively priced food market. Relevant stakeholders can engage with the Competition Commission by visiting their website to get more information on the market inquiry. The inquiry legally has to be wrapped up within 18 months of its commencement, which is the 31st of March 2023. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for you. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure walking this journey with you. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the team. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.